So I try and maximize the benefit to most people in these videos, and maybe later I can get into some more general, generic stuff. But this is quite possibly a video, if any of these reach people, that may help the most people. One of the most common doubts that I hear in people is the difference between DMT and an NDE. And I've heard some very light touching on the subject, a little bit info here, a little bit info there. But, and I just want to clarify, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a physician, but I do have common sense, at least a little. And it's kind of the same principle of, do you need to be a pulmonologist to know that smoking cigarettes is bad for your lungs? No, you just need to have common sense and realize, oxygen perfusion and clean air is supposed to go in. You don't do that, right? You don't stick dirty tar in your lungs. You don't have to know much more. The more you learn, you just learn about the intricacies of it and how to help it if it has happened, that kind of thing. But um, I just kind of want to talk about this, and I actually will cite sources, various information that is more on the strictly mainstream scientific side of things, where even they're like, yeah, it doesn't seem to be the same thing. But then I'll kind of bring it all together with some actual verified medical evidence of impossibilities that, at a very minimum, show that consciousness exists outside of the body and is not generated by it. Um, so you'll see my screen get brighter randomly. I'm going to pull some sources, but I'll just start with the summary. So NDEs versus DMT, what is the difference? So I will give the evidence. I will give some hypotheses that I have, some theories, um, and then I will get into the data, and then I will give some more data on the medical side. So DMT is a psychedelic, and you could look at videos on YouTube of it and do research that will explain it far better than I can explain the mechanisms of action and how it all works psychedelically. DMT is a psychedelic that induces sort of trips in people. I've known people who've taken it before, and we'll get into like I said, the clinical side of things. But it seems to be from a spiritual perspective, and again, I'll back this up with some stuff. But it seems to be more of a general releasing of your consciousness, and you just kind of gravitate towards whatever your soul is leaning towards at that side, but it's not really being done through God as much. It's more of like an uncontrolled window into potential parallel dimensions that could be good, they could be bad. And there are a lot of things lacking in DMT experiences, that even if there are some similarities on very rare occasion, it's never the same. That happen with NDEs that don't happen in DMT experiences. However, it does seem to do something with the consciousness. It seems to release it somehow, and oftentimes you do have this similar sense of love and unity and oneness with these DMT experiences. Hardcore atheists, hardcore Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, whatever. It seems to be pretty universal if that's the case. And then you also have obviously some bad trips as well. And you guys will have to forgive me a little bit here. My hair's kind of crazy. I just got out of the shower and I'm sitting in a cold room, and the wind's blowing. But so there are similarities of all of these things. But I want to get into some of the key differences, because the biggest question is the atheistic sort of godless answer is that your brain releases DMT when you die. And it seems to be kind of a taboo subject in a way that a lot of NDEers and whatever, they don't necessarily want to address that. I don't know if it fills them with doubts, but I'll actually dig into the data. And the data very clearly shows that it doesn't even in rats, which they've done the majority of studies on, even for a rat, it's not even remotely close to being enough to induce a psychedelic effect. But we'll go into that, and then we'll go into even more strong evidence for it. But so, and all of this will be in the description box there. And I'm not gonna. I mean, this is an absolutely gigantic article. Can I share my screen? I don't know. Maybe I can record my screen here. Well, I'll just post them in the link below, and you could use AI summaries, and you could verify the stuff that I'm saying with AI summaries and whatever. I'd recommend Grok or OpenAI. They're kind of like the best ones right now. But long story short, they did studies with rats primarily, just because of it's kind of difficult to get human volunteers who are willing to let you cut into their skull right before they die. And there are some principles that you need to establish. And again, you can literally bring a MD in, and this has been verified through various different studies and actual MDs and clinicians, and I'm just reciting them. And sometimes they are verifying it for the purpose of hormones that are released, and sometimes it's for other reasons. But the same principle is always consistent. Your body does not magically generate large quantities of hormones instantaneously under any circumstances without exception. It releases what has already been built up prior, and there are no exceptions to that. Growth hormone, insulin, adrenaline, all of these things do not just magically appear when you need them. They are released when you need them. And when you're out, you're out. You have an adrenaline rush, right? Eventually you're going to run out and you're going to be like this. I've been there. I've been playing sports my whole life. You just sprinting as hard as you can. I've been out in the ocean surfing. And I thought I was going to die and your adrenaline's going, and then you land, and then it takes you 3 days to recover, even as a young guy, you know? But when it's released, that's it. It's gone. It has to resynthesize, which requires a whole bunch of fancy processes and all this. Do your research on all that. So in rats, we'll start with the rats. They did a study on rats, and they found that DMT was released upon death. Such a small amount of DMT, in fact, that it would be laughable to assume that it would even induce any kind of psychedelic effect in a rat, number one. And number two, it also releases every other hormone, and you void your bowels when you die as well. You crap yourself. Everything gets released all at once. Your body doesn't hold on to anything. If it has a mechanism of action to release hormones, or for the most part, this is true, but for DMT, it's true. For a lot of other hormones, that's true. Your body will release everything almost immediately upon death. But it can only release what it already has, what's already stored in there. And even in the studies where they specifically were only looking at DMT releases in rats, it was very conclusive that it was not enough to induce any kind of psychedelic effect. And DMT exists in humans. And again, there's human studies in here as well. Human studies on living subjects that are healthy and well, which means they're going to have the most of everything, right? They're going to have, or at least a hell of a lot more than somebody who's near death or dead. And in a healthy adult human, the absolute most amount of DMT that has ever been recorded without somebody having taken psilocybin or some kind of a mushroom or whatever the mushrooms are that release DMT, the absolute most ever recorded is, and I quote, there's like 4 articles here, I'm not going to look it up, but again, do your research, verify, check everything I'm saying, was roughly 1,000 times less than what would minimally be required to induce a psychedelic effect. 1,000 times less. Not 100 times, not 10 times. If it was like 5 times less, I'd be like, all right, well, maybe that's a little wiggle room. 1,000 times. That's 3 zeros. A 1 with 3 zeros after, just in case, you don't know. That's a lot. So the absolute most amount of DMT, and there are a lot of studies about DMT in living humans, which means they're going to have plenty of hormones to check. That's fine. You can just go in the brain and check. The most that we even have is not even remotely enough to induce a psychedelic effect. And there's never been in the history of mankind, in recorded medical history, an example where somebody spontaneously experienced a DMT trip. It does not happen. It's not like a spontaneous release of adrenaline for fight or flight. That happens. And again, it's what was already previously built up in your system. If you have an adrenaline deficiency, or if you've already used up your adrenaline, you're screwed. You're not going to get anything. And that's what these studies have shown as well. So if anything, in a dying patient, whatever's there, I mean, it's not even close. And that's pretty strong evidence, right? I think that's pretty strong. But that's not even really the strongest when you look at what I wanted to get towards. So here is, and again, these sources will be down there. And also in the first video I posted, I put NDE RF website on there. Just check that out. I mean, you could spend 3 days looking through all that stuff. And a lot of those are medically verified. And when you have medical verification of some of these stories, it gives a lot of credibility to the ones that aren't necessarily medically verified, Somebody tells you about a story of a leprechaun with pink hair and wears yellow slippers. It sounds like they're full of it. But then if you see it yourself and it's verified like 500 times, then all of a sudden other stories that haven't been necessarily directly verified, all of a sudden they have some credibility, right? So it only takes one verified one to prove something's going on. When you have thousands of actually modern medical verified ones, then it gives credibility to the others. So even if 50, and I'm not saying this is even the case, but even if 50% of them were just lies, and I'm highly sure that that's not the case, the fact that 50% of them obviously are verified is just crazy. So So check that out. But let me pull, this is from one of the sources that'll be listed here. What lines up and what doesn't with DMT? And this is from the Frontiers link, which is, I'll make sure I link this as well. So this is the Frontiers link. DMT models the near-death experience, or does DMT model the near-death experience, right? And this is the clinical analysis of it. So here are some of the similarities. They had 13 healthy participants receive DMT versus a placebo. Afterwards, they filled out a near-death experience NDE scale. Under DMT, people scored significantly higher than the placebo on most of the NDE scale dimensions. So it seems like there's something going on with your consciousness, right? It does some kind of separation. Also, there's some stuff with like the CIA astral projection where they're able to like trigger something in your brain and trigger an out-of-body experience. It's like an eject button for your consciousness, but that's a separate thing. Anyway, also, there were strong correlations between how mystical or how much ego disillusion a person felt under DMT and their NDE scale score. So I just want to pause right there. So there was a theory, neurologically, and again, look all this up. Don't take some random guy's word for it. Look it up yourself. I'm just delivering the information, okay? There was a theory that there is a part of the brain that dissipates or dies or gets damaged when you are actively dying, and it has to do with the ego. And when that dissipates, it gives you this sense of oneness, this sense of connection to everybody else, and that has been thoroughly disproven. They also thought that if you destroy a certain part of the brain, the only consistent parts of the brain are the parts that have to do with static motor functions. So if you destroy a certain part of the brain, your hand's not going to work, or your reflexes aren't going to work, or your depth perception won't work. But it's extremely weird how the parts of the brain that they associate with personality, with memory, with ego, with anger, all these different things. There have been people who have had their head impaled with a fence post, real story, who had that part of the brain destroyed and they were completely fine. They just had some headaches. Personality was totally fine. There have been people who have tried to unalive themselves, and I'm avoiding using certain words on YouTube so this doesn't get shadow banned or something, but and they shoot themselves, and they destroy that part of the brain, and they survive. And it was the part of the brain that controls all that, and they come back perfectly fine, no brain damage. People have died for very long periods of time, hours, and come back. The point is anything that has to do with the soul or consciousness is never really consistent. In the sense of, if it was really just isolated in the brain, other parts of the brain will compensate. And they base all of this entirely on MRI scans, effectively, that light up when you think of certain things or certain things happen. But it's the cause and effect and the order of which that happens is extremely important. And now they're realizing, it's not really being generated in the brain. We're actually seeing it nano or microseconds after it actually occurs. Then we're seeing that part of the brain light up. And if that part of the brain gets destroyed and you survive that, some other part of the brain will pick it up. So, back to the point that I was making, the ego disillusion, okay? Ego disillusion happens when you have these psychedelic experience, near-death experiences. So people who are still alive are able to experience that. And then people whose brain is completely dead, asystole, their heart is gone. Any clinical people will know what that is. You are dead and gone. And there's no way to shock you back from certain patterns. I believe asystole is one of those patterns. You cannot be clear. You can't be brought back from that. And they also have that ego disillusion when they're completely dead and gone, and there's no electrical activity to support life whatsoever. So the theory about ego disillusion having to do with a part of the brain being gone, also people who have had tumors and that part of the brain gets destroyed, they're fine, etc. And then there are people who will fall over, they'll fall 3 feet and bump their head on the ground and they'll forget their whole life. So it's very interesting how they don't really know what they're talking about in a lot of cases. Sorry, not sorry. But, strong correlations between how mystical and how ego disillusion a person felt under DMT and their NDE scale score. I'm looking at a summary of this Frontiers article, by the way. We'll post in the description. Some traits of the participant, high absorption, some paranormal belief were associated with more intense NDE-like results under DMT, blah, blah, blah. There was a lot of overlap between the NDE and the DMT experience. However, here's the kicker. What doesn't line up / big differences. This is the interesting part. People don't tend to come back with new knowledge that would be impossible to otherwise know. In other words, real world, tangible knowledge of things that they would not know, things that are happening in other rooms, what have you. Visual intensity and imagery. DMT experiences tend to have very strong, rapidly moving imagery, vivid colors, weird abstract forms, geometric patterns. These features are not typical in NDEs. I've been hearing people talk about this like since the 60s, you know, or hear of people. I wasn't alive in the 60s, but you know what I mean? Like geometric patterns, crazy stuff. I mean, you guys, I'm sure, have seen movies where people take psilocybin or something and it's like geometric patterns. Border or no point of return. In many NDE reports, people say that they come to a threshold, some boundary, a border between life and death. The DMT participants almost never experience anything of the sort. Encounters with deceased or religious spirits. In NDEs, people very often report seeing dead relatives or religious figures. Under DMT, that's less common, or more varied and unexpected. It could be alien entities, and that's kind of one of my things. I was thinking like DMT kind of just releases your consciousness in general. It's not as controlled. It could be dangerous, maybe. Life review, very common in NDEs, less so under DMT, and that wording is it's not even strong enough wording. It's like pretty unheard of to have those similarities at all. And then it's also worth noting, like I said, a lot of NDE, and again, do your research, NDERF, look up at verified NDEs, medically verified NDEs. There was a woman who floated above she died. She described what was happening while her eyelids were shut. I think they were taped shut, maybe, but she was completely dead. And she floated above her body, and there was like a window way up there that nobody could possibly access and hasn't accessed. And she said there's a shoe up there. Nobody's ever been up there, or at least not anywhere remotely recently. And then they're like, yeah, you're crazy. So they sent up a janitor to look, and there was a shoe up there. And she was, then there was another person who described, while they were resuscitating her, while she was dead, they described exactly what they said, exactly what they did. The medical staff verified it. I think one of the doctor's pens fell out of his pocket, and she said, yeah, you never did get your pen. Somebody had dentures get taken out of their mouth. They're like, or I don't know if it was dentures, it was something. Just look through the website. You can even go on ChatGPT or Grok and type in, I would say Grok. It's a little bit more concise with pulling like raw data for certain things, but use whatever. Medically verified or independently verified NDEs, and start there, and that'll kind of ground you a little bit, and then that gives credibility, obviously, to a good chunk of the rest. So what the article cautions and remains speculative, and keep in mind, this is from psychologists, psychiatrists, clinicians, whatever. The amount of DMT naturally in a human body is very small in baseline conditions, aka where you have not supplemented with a psychedelic mushroom. So, very small. It is proven that the brain cannot produce or release enough, or is not proven that the brain can release enough of its own to replicate a full NDE under dying or death. The blah, blah, blah. What's one of these articles? One of these articles talks about the actual amount that's released. You'll have to look through, and again, you can tell it to summarize it. So then I started looking at other articles and just general research on your body releasing hormones in general. And I've already touched on this in the beginning of the video, just quickly summarizing it. Your body does not magically create things when you die. It can only release what it already has. And in recorded history, there is not a single human being that has ever had enough DMT to produce a psychedelic effect, because, as I'm sure you can imagine, there are a lot of sources of data on DMT and the exact dosages of DMT. And in many countries and places, is actually like sanctioned and legal, and the government like oversees it, and or at least it's not illegal. And so they have all these doctors and everybody that they know the exact, it's like anesthesia, like they know exactly how much to give you on average to induce an effect. And it's so cataclysmically higher than the amount that the highest recorded human being in recorded history has ever had in their brain, that it's laughable to even suggest otherwise. But even beyond that, even if you did create DMT in your brain, which it's proven that you don't create nearly enough. I mean, what you do have is for like other things, probably pain control or something. I don't even know how much that does. It may just be for neuron health, for all we know, but it's not even close. But just hypothetically, I'll humor the skeptics. Sure, hypothetically, let's say it did release it. You are obtaining knowledge of impossible things while you are dead, asystole, flatlined, heart stopped, brain stopped. I'm not talking about 5 or 10 minutes of wiggle room. I'm talking about verified cases where people were in the morgue cold and their blood had sunk to the bottom of their body. And they woke up in agony when they came back into their bodies because their body was starting to decay. More than one. Either in the morgue or in the woods with maggots in their mouth and stuff like this, and they came back. And they came back with the exact knowledge of things that were going on in the physical world. And I'm not talking about like a prediction of the future that kind of half-ass comes to life or something. I'm talking about, yeah, you were watching, you were 5 buildings over in a different floor of the building, and you were wearing this exact shirt, and you were cooking a casserole, and when you cooked the casserole, you accidentally spilled it, and you tried to grab it, and it burnt your hand, and then she's like, "Yeah, I do have it," and it's stuff like that. Not necessarily that being an exact example, but it's the same and crazier. So at a very minimum, what we've established is your consciousness is outside of your body. So, I mean, at a very minimum, we've established your consciousness is outside of your body. Which means it exists outside of your body, and energy cannot be created or destroyed. That is also verified by mainstream media. That's not debated. So, if that's the case, then, it's almost like these collectively over history, probably hundreds of thousands or millions of reports of NDEs, including before Christ. There were NDE reports before Christ that were exactly like NDEs today, and they were being explained by somebody who was before Christ. So there's type in world very first NDE account. It was some soldier, and he described the life review and a bunch of stuff. And it's almost like those accounts that go back thousands of years, and that's just recorded history. I'm sure there's stuff even before that we don't have access to, or it's destroyed or whatever, that have pointed towards that answer have been correct the whole time. So yeah, the evidence is obvious that you exist outside of your body, and consciousness goes on and all these different things, and you come back with impossible knowledge, and you can say, oh, well, the brain is projecting a consciousness field. I was like, well, that would require a power source that you do not have, and you are completely dead. And you are completely dead for a very long time, and whatever cells are decaying or whatever the heck happens, those are your autonomous cells that have nothing to do with consciousness. Those are your blood cells. Those are your skin cells. Those things start to break down. Your brain is gone. You're flatlined. There's no pain sensitivity. There's no activity whatsoever in any of these things. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of run through some of that. And there's a lot of data here as well. But yeah, the body doesn't work like that. The body doesn't magically synthesize. You don't go from having, 1,000 times less DMT than you would need to induce even the most minimum effective psychedelic experience to just releasing, like, quantumly teleporting DMT into your brain and having a psychedelic experience right before you die, and then coming back to life for some of these people because their body can support life again because the medical staff are working on them or whatever happened, with knowledge that's verified by multiple independent parties, even hardcore atheistic people. There's actually a famous cardiac surgeon who was by no means a religious person or anything of the sort by his own admission, and he has even talked about, he was like, there are people who were dead, and they describe exactly what happened. And he didn't even talk about God or spirituality. He was like, could that be the soul? Could it be? He's like, we don't have an answer. And he kind of just like delays past it. Wasn't like it wasn't even a point worth mentioning. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. So that's just something that when I first started looking into all that stuff, the highly skeptical side of me did all this research, and I actually learned how to read medical studies and kind of deduce things. But yeah, so it is actually disproven that that under any circumstances, even a very healthy person would synthesize anywhere near enough DMT to do any of those things. And even in the rat studies, even it's not even enough for rats to have any kind of psychedelic experience. So, but yeah, hope this helps. Feel free to throw any questions in there. Like I said, I'll throw the sources in there, and do your own research and that kind of thing. But I think that's it. Yeah. So, all right, guys, that's it. Thanks.